Now, when you look at this, the point differential for Charlotte, they had the fourth worst point differential in the league, yet they were third in the NBA in win differential behind the Lakers and the Nuggets. So basically, they outplayed a lot of their efficiency stats, and their, some could probably argue that they were a little bit lucky at times. I think a big reason why they won 4 more games than they were expected to was because of their performance in the clutch. They had the 3rd best offensive rating in the clutch, 7th best net rating, and shot the ball the best out of any team in the NBA behind the arc during crunch time. I actually asked James Borrego this question at the end of year press conference, and I wondered if losing Kemba Walker allowed him to be a little bit more creative in crunch time, where teams couldn't key in on Kemba. Now, we all would love more talent on the roster with Kemba Walker, but do you think there's anything to that notion that a team that doesn't have a proven star and they're all just trying to make the right play and get the right shot maybe could perform better late in games? Or is that notion just kind of crazy to think about?
No, I'm a firm believer in democratic basketball. I think the league had become over-reliant on superstar hero ball, in the previous era. I thought that the Golden State Warriors and kind of their rise changed that dynamic and encouraged that to be something different. And really, if you go back, the Spurs did that. When they battled the Miami Heat in the finals in back-to-back years, and that second year when they just played the prettiest brand of basketball a lot of us have ever seen in terms of ball movement, and shot selection, that to me instituted kind of a different idea about how you do this in a league where everybody's looking to isolate their main guy late in games to allow him to either make a play or make a shot. When you don't have superstar anchors to do that, you have to come up with something different. I like to see sets late in games. I mean, I know that's a foreign concept a lot of times. Usually it's just roll the ball out to your best player and tell them to make something happen. There's nothing wrong with running a set. That's what these guys have been doing their whole life. And I think when you have a guy like Devontae, and I know, you can put a lot on one guy, but just having Devontae Graham in those moments, a young player still proving himself in the league, but a guy who's been a lead guy and lead guard and a lead guy in high pressure situations like he was for so long at Kansas. I felt like he just looked really comfortable in those moments. And then Terry Rozier he's a swashbuckler. He's going to play guts out, and he's never going to be afraid of those big moments. Having 2 guys like that who basically always had the ball in their hands in those moments gave you an edge that not everybody in this league has, because not everybody has guards who can operate at in that manner.
Yeah, that's a good point about Devontae's experience at KU. It's like him jumping into this role and closing out games. It may have seemed new to observers from the outside, but it probably wasn't all totally foreign to him, because he's closed out games at Fog Allen or on the road in the Big 12 or in the NCAA tournament or whatever. And it's interesting, too, to think about sort of like the late game sets versus, spread pick and roll or ISO or whatever. It's like everyone's trying to get to the same spots on the court, just different ways to sort of like, slice an apple. But speaking of James Borrego, look, this staff was really brought in to develop this young group of talent on the roster. And we saw it with Devontae, PJ, Miles Bridges, some good, some bad this season. Certainly Malik Monk did some things. Cody Martin really looked to turn into a nice winning player as an older rookie this season too. I think in sports sometimes we sort of like to overuse the phrase young core, right? It's just like every team who's in a development stage likes to use that sort of moniker to brand and to sell youth and hope, and whether it's valid or not, who knows. I think about like those post-Kobe, pre-LeBron Lakers teams with Lonzo and Ingram and Hart, and that Brutal. Team totally called the young core all the time, whatever. Yeah, but do you think it's legitimate to state in Charlotte that this Hornets roster in fact has a young core? That this is something that they can build on, as opposed to, this is just a couple of young guys they have that are relatively talented, but nothing, but maybe nothing extreme or nothing, that's going to turn a corner for a franchise that just happened to be on rookie contracts at the same time.
That's a good question, because not every young core deserves that kind of, attention. Sometimes you just got a bunch of young guys and you're still sorting through them, trying to figure out, who are keepers and who aren't. Now, full disclosure, I went to high school with PJ Washington's father and his aunt. We're from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where his dad's family is from. So I've known the Washingtons for years. So I'm bullish on PJ, just on genes alone. I mean, I know he comes from good stock.
Yeah.
I thought he was an underrated guy, honestly, when he came into the league last year. And this was before he went out opening night, shot all those threes and freaked everybody out, and people were ready to give him Rookie of the Year and all that stuff. But in my mind, young players, you've either got one of two types of young guys. You either got those young guys like the Lakers had, who are long-term projects that you're not sure if they're going to hit on the very high side of their potential. Like if they're going to hit those ceilings, if Ingram and Lonzo, and all these guys are going to hit on the high side, then you got a chance to build a young championship core of players with that group. The other thing you might have is workers. You might have worker bees. And to me, that's what they're working with right now in Charlotte. They might not have the guy who's going to be their star anchor player at some point. And I liken it to what Atlanta did when they piled up a bunch of young players, Josh Childress, Josh Smith, Al Horford, all those guys. But the guy who really made them go was Joe Johnson. He was a free agent that they had to go get in a sign and trade that everybody knows how that blew up an organization and all that stuff. But you sometimes your young core is one thing, and then the player that moves you to that next phase is a free agent acquisition. It's not necessarily going to be the young superstar that you draft. I don't know how many times I have to explain to people how hard it is to do what the Warriors did, which is they got their core pieces in drafts. It's like what the Thunder did. They got their core pieces that went to the finals, in Kevin Durant, Russell Westbrook, and James Harden. They drafted them all. Serge Ibaka. I mean, go back in the history of the league and look at teams that make it to the finals, even not win a championship, just make it to the finals. And how many of them are pieced together through all these different methods? Never. It's very rare that you draft a core group that leads you to championships. So, to me, what you've got is young, promising pieces. And now the real work begins, because the new vanguard in this league is player development. You can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't develop them, if they're not being developed properly over the course of 3 to 4 seasons, you're never going to get a chance to see what they look like on their high side. And that's where the Hornets have to be mindful of the fact that Miles Bridges and PJ Washington in a lot of systems would be redundant. They would be the same type of player. They would play the same position, occupy the same spaces on the floor, and basically have the same function. If you're going to be really good, you're going to have to find a way for one of those guys to play outside of whatever the mold that he would normally play. And they've got to complement each other along with an undersized backcourt. And then you really don't know yet who or what's going to be your salvation, in terms of a post presence / a stretch 5, whatever you're going to have as that big guy in that group. You got to find one. But what I do like about them is they have kind of a lunch pail mentality about them as a group. Devontae is the guy who, for all he did in college, he didn't come into the league with a silver spoon. He wasn't a lottery pick. He wasn't a guy who's, people predicted stardom for him. PJ Washington's a guy who's, probably felt he should have been drafted higher than he was, and probably wanted to come out of school a year earlier than he did. You got all these things that should be fueling their fire. Same for Miles Bridges. When you dominate the competition in high school and then you go to college and you're a star, you expect to be a Rookie of the Year, the guy who everybody's talking about as an all-star. And he's not getting that kind of buzz right now. So for them, if I'm the Hornets, I'm feeding them a daily dose of People don't respect you. Nobody thinks you guys are as good as you're going to be. And, it's up to you to go out, put in the work to prove them wrong. In this league, I can't tell you how many times over the past, 19, 20 years that I've seen that work as magic fuel for young players to continue to get better and better. And, you look up before you know it, they're a problem. A core group of guys like that with chips on their shoulders become a problem.
Yeah, I know Richie and Spencer can speak to this too. The term player development is used frequently from members in and around the Hornets. It's what they're selling, and it doesn't feel like it feels like it's not just sizzle. Like there's some stake to that as well too. I appreciate the worker bee analogy as well too, while describing the Hornets young core. I appreciate that as well too. And it's interesting too because it's like these Laker young guys. Like it does look like long term they're gonna turn out and could be really a solid foundation for a title contending team eventually. If things go well with Zion in New Orleans, it's just going to be for a different franchise. Not where they were initially assembled, but Charlotte averaged about 96 possessions per game this season, 15 seconds per offensive possession overall, 18 seconds per offensive possession after a made opponent field goal. All of those ranked 30th, dead last in the NBA. But they took good shots too. 38% of their field goal attempts at the rim, 37% of their field goal attempts were threes, both those top 10 marks in the league. Outside of the obvious, and maybe we've hit on some of this already, but sort of outside of the obvious, really Devontae Graham pick and roll playmaking. What did you sort of like or dislike with James Borrego's offense during the sort of like year one of a rebuild?
Well, I mean, so much of what you do offensively in this league is based on your personnel. If you don't have a 6'5" to 6'8" wing scorer who can, look at the elite teams in this league. And I mean the elite, the best offensive team in the league has a 6'8", 225-pound, bull who can get to the rim whenever he wants to, can step back and shoot threes. If your offensive catalyst isn't a guy that's able to create for himself and other people with that kind of size, with that James Harden 6'5" to, Luka Doncic, LeBron James, Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, even Pascal Siakam in Toronto showed you. I mean, if you're not working with guys that fit those dimensions in this league right now, it becomes a struggle. It becomes a tougher thing to do. And if you don't have a cadre of shooters that you can space all over the floor, it becomes extremely difficult. Think about, and I'm going around the way here to make this point, but think about how tough it is for a team like Philadelphia to score, with Ben Simmons, a non-shooter, as talented as he is, an all-star and one of the most freakish players in the league. But if you don't have a consistent creator and jump shooter as your offensive catalyst, as the guy who's got the ball in his hands and is basically the conduit for everything else you do on the floor, it becomes really difficult just to manufacture what we saw in different eras when you were feeding the ball inside and playing inside out, or you had a big man you could play around. So I think, if you look at the offense they had this year, that was getting comfortable with two new guys as your primary ball handlers, and without the benefit of that perimeter scorer, shot creator, who was going to take the pressure off everybody else by being a guy that manufactures offense for you when nobody else can. So I would be less, you look at the numbers and say, oh man, well, this is a team that's not operating with an incumbent superstar leading scorer on their team. Who was the returning leading scorer on this Hornets team after free agency last summer and Kemba goes to Boston? You start asking yourself, what do you have coming back that you could build around? It should have been Cody Zeller, right? It should have been somebody who's been in the program for a few years that you could kind of lean on and build around. You didn't have that. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes it a lot more difficult. That's why, John Schumann and I argue all the time, because Shu's got numbers pouring out of his ears at all hours of the night. And I'm always arguing to him about, you hear you hear coaches talk about, and you hear executives sometimes talk about the spirit a team plays with. Mm-hmm. And the spirit isn't just your attitude or the energy you play with. Sometimes it's the flow. It's like, does your team understand what makes it tick as that makes them tick as a group? And are they willing to surrender whatever their ambitions are to make sure they play to that? Mm-hmm. I think this was a year where you're understanding, maybe Miles Bridges and PJ and these other guys are understanding, all right, the engine of what we're going to do lies in Devontae and or Terry. And you'll see this year a much more fluid offense based on these guys having a season or however 60-some games to figure that out, and then coming back with a fresh training camp and recognizing, if we want to be successful, this is how our offense has to flow. This is how we have to play. And that'll be up to James Borrego and his staff to drive that point home in film study and everything else, which we know the metrics that players and teams are consuming now is beyond the scope of whatever we imagined a generation ago. So these guys are going to have all that information at their fingertips. It's just about now convincing them all to play to that strength.
Love it. Love that. So Sekou, I'm curious because kind of in between the lines there, you were talking a lot about Devontae Graham, and I think he's a very worthy most improved player candidate for the 1920 season. I've seen the majority, I guess, of national NBA personalities kind of dismiss him. I think most of that is because of there's just no baseline to go off of, right? From his first season, rookie season, where he only played 667 minutes. But I mean, do you think that this guy in his sample size, and he played, I think, in the top 5 minutes this past season before the season got cut short there, and became one of the most lethal off the dribble bombers in the entire league? I mean, he's up there with Harden and Dame Lillard. I mean, it's just really incredible, and it's unprecedented what he did in terms of bursting onto the scene from a shooting perspective. So do you think that he is a legit most improved player candidate?
Yeah. I mean, and I think if there were 5 slots in that category on your ballot, he's probably in the 4th or 5th spot. Mm-hmm. But you got to think about who else made quantum leaps, even from much more productive seasons last year to what they're doing this year. I mean, you could legitimately, this is this ridiculous thing about the talent that's in the league right now. You could legitimately say Giannis, Luka, Pascal Siakam, Brandon Ingram, like guys who've been all-stars. They could all be on your ballot and you wouldn't be wrong.
Yeah.
And that's the context sometimes that you have to keep in mind when you're voting on these things. I was filling my ballot out last week, and the rookie of the year situation was funny to me because you forget who started off hot, who kind of faded a little bit as the year goes on, but you got to fill out not only rookie of the year, but you got to fill out that all rookie team. Mm-hmm. So you start, studying it a little deeper, and the same goes for most improved. It's funny. I'm texting back and forth with some other guys. I'm not going to give you their name. I'm not going to out them. I'll tell you that they were stumped on most improved because a lot of times as a voter, you don't want to put Luka on there. You don't want to put the obvious, guy who's gone from a runaway rookie of the year to MVP candidate. Well, to some people, like, no, that doesn't make sense. That's a hell of an improvement. Like, to go from there to that next level is amazing in your second year in the league. So I think there are guys who would probably push him down the list a little bit, but he would definitely be in your top 5 if you're just looking at opportunity, minutes and production from last season to this one. I can't imagine you having somebody that has a better argument to be on the list.
Right.
Yeah. Just from that perspective.
The fluidity of that award is so funny too, because it's like the fact that Pascal Siakam is like I'm not, maybe Bam is the front runner or Brandon Ingram or whatever, but it's like Siakam has just almost as good of a case, and he won the award last season. It's just so funny to see like where the baseline and sort of like where the goalposts for that move almost year to year, while the talent is also getting better too.
It was I remember that was an award nobody wanted to win.
Yeah. Yeah.
Around 2003, 2004, guys would win, whoever won that award would be running away from it the next, like because they wanted to feel like they had arrived.
You're right.
It's kind of like the six man, until Jamal Crawford and Lou Williams started passing it back and forth between each other. You didn't want to win that thing more than once. Like you wanted to win 6 man a year, and then you want to be a starter, and you want to be, there was kind of this natural progression. But I just think, again, guys come into the league, and there's a station for you. There's a space that you have to carve out as a rookie, and it's not always ideal. It's not always the best situation for guards. If you come in and you're not a lottery pick point guard or a runaway, dominant player right away in whatever situation you tend to have to do what Devontae did. You got to wait for an opportunity and have your game sharp, and then go off when you get a chance. I mean, and if you make those kinds of leaps in terms of the production in the game, like you can look at him and tell how much more comfortable he was, how much better he was. When you start dropping 40-point games or doing crazy stuff, in this league, that's not a mistake. That doesn't happen. Not in this league. That's not, the Linsanity only happens once in a lifetime. Where the guy just goes off for however long and then fades, back to whatever's normal. I think Devontae's going to have a chance to be a really, really good player in this league for years to come, because he's playing a prime position and he's a technician. He's a guy who's had a ton of experience with the ball in his hand. Think about when in college, he had another All-American guard in the backcourt.
Frank Mason.
I mean, he had another NBA player that he was playing alongside in college, and both those guys got invaluable experience doing what Devontae's doing now, which is having to play off of another ball-dominant guy and making sure you get yours. So he's had some really good training for the role he's in now.
But you brought up Giannis in the most improved, player conversation, and just the fact that name even came up is just like a testament to, how volatile and how wide ranging, the candidates are. I was thinking today, I was like, it's almost like we need like a breakthrough player of the year or something like that. That delineates the difference between these two, because I don't know. I'm certainly biased, but I think Devontae should be right at the top of that list. But let's talk about another young player that Charlotte has, who has not ever consistently shown real promise in Charlotte. But I thought that certainly his best games since being a pro, Malik Monk, came in that like late January, February, early March time span this past year. He was really, really good at the rim this past season, which we didn't see at all from him, in seasons past. I thought he started competing defensively. That was evident. He just played like he had a chip on his shoulder. Again, Sekou, you've talked about it. Some of those things you really can't measure, but you could just see it on the screen. You could tell that this guy was about to turn a corner, and then he gets the suspension even before the pandemic hit, and the rug kind of gets pulled out right from under his feet. So I'm curious, though, because Monk is extension eligible, and I think there's an opportunity here, in my opinion, for Charlotte to go ahead and get him under contract for a very, again, my opinion, a valuable price, although I know he hadn't shown a lot in the league. But I haven't seen a lot of people talking about this. Do you think that the Hornets should go ahead with all the cap flexibility they have moving forward to go ahead and just lock down Monk and double down on him now that he's extension eligible, also understanding he hasn't done much in the NBA since he's been here?
Yeah, he's a tough one because he's talented. I don't think that's debatable, and he's got that skill that you desperately need. I mean, even though he had, like you said, he hasn't shown it consistently yet. I don't know if I would do that, though, if I'm the Hornets. I'm not sure. Based on some of the young guys I have now and whatever I'm planning to do, whatever my pro personnel people are doing in terms of looking around the league and trying to find, which is my favorite thing about the NBA, by the way, is your advanced scouts and your pro personnel people. They know the league better than anybody else. If you ever get a chance to sit down with them, in the press room or on the road somewhere, and you see them and you know these guys, they can tell you about the 11th dude on somebody else's bench, that would be perfect for their team. And I'm not so sure that if you're the Hornets right now, you refrain from doing anything long term with Monk because you might think that you can find a better piece that fits in with the other guys you have right now that you're trying to build around. To me, if you don't pop in your first couple of years with and if you've had an opportunity to get in a rotation and get minutes, like if you haven't built your strength up enough or stay disciplined enough to what the coaches are asking you to do, if you haven't found a way to really pop after 2 years in this league, that's a red flag, not just for the team, but for you as a player. Like, if you're talented enough and you know where you stand in terms of the talent, like if you're good enough to be on the floor and in a rotation in this league and you haven't seen it the first couple of years, it's time to start looking in the mirror and ask yourself, all right, it's not about my opportunity. It's not about the coach not liking me. What have I not done to take advantage of this opportunity or put myself in a more advantageous position? And I think that's where I'm wondering what kind of soul searching Malik Monk is doing about his status with the Hornets right now, because this is probably not a position he thought he'd be in, given his pedigree, what he did before he got to the league. He was seen as a guy who would be ideal for today's NBA.
Yeah.
A guy who could get his shot off basically from anywhere on the floor, and had played in a high level, a high pressure program in college. And I'm here to tell you, like, think about the names of young players we would associate with his class, his high school class, and where they are now. His name won't come up. He's not a guy that's top of mind when you think about, and I'm just talking about the league. You get a chance to watch much differently, being there and being locked in on the Hornets the way you are. I'm talking about from a broader league perspective.
Yeah.
His name's not coming up. So if I'm the Hornets, I don't know that I'm going to go pushing that envelope against, by myself. I'm like,
right.
There's no market driving it. I think it's smarter to maybe wait and see exactly what you got. Because does he fit in that rotation? Think about you guys you got now.
I think
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that like the bigger thing, Sekou, is that this roster, as we've all talked about already, is so void of this like next level. Like, how many guys can take that next step into like, oh, now are we like scratching on all-star talent kind of players? And I think Monk is one of those guys on this roster. So it's this emotional tug of war where we haven't seen it enough, and now we have a drug suspension, and now we just like really don't know how much we can trust and buy into you. But at the same time, like, we're this small market with, sometimes it just feels like we're working off the scrap heap all the time. So like, should we just double down on this guy? Because we just don't have many people like that, many players like that in the pipeline. So that's why I asked the question. I think it's fascinating though, because I do think the Hornets could get him back on a pretty low extension that he would need to sign the ink on for his own reasons, probably.
Yeah. And look, this is a league where you can go back and trace that very decision. Like, do you bet on a young guy that maybe hasn't done what you thought he'd do when he hits that point, when he's extension eligible?
Mm-hmm.
And there was a time when it seemed like teams picked up options and did it every time. Like, there was an era when it seemed like that was happening all the time, whether the guy really had established himself or not. And that's how teams have gotten into those situations where they look up and go, look at our books, because a lot of times it's a dangerous thing betting on your own talent sometimes if you haven't really vetted them the way you need to. And this happens to good organizations. Think about the money Miami had on the books last season.
Yeah.
Tyler Johnson and Deion Waiters and
guys guys that they bet on for whatever reasons.
James Johnson
absolutely did not fit what the current vision of their team looks like. So it happens that it's a dilemma that every franchise has to face. This is when your GM and your front office people earn their money, because as much as we like to think this league is about you lining up in the draft and getting lucky and Kevin Durant or LeBron or somebody falling in your lap. It's much more about those simple decisions you make on do you rock with Bam Adebayo, or do you keep Hassan Whiteside in a spot that Bam has clearly outplayed him for? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are are you
Yeah.
betting on your young talent, the right talent, at the right times, or are you? One of my favorite stories that I heard Antoine Walker talking about the other day. He's talking about Rick. He was on I think it was the Knuckleheads podcast. He was talking about Rick Pitino, and he's like, bro, we traded Chauncey Billups. He started talking about, how quick an organization can abandon its own talent, in favor of, hey, I want to win right now, and I want guys to be here right now. Sometimes you have to gamble. You have to roll those dice to see, does this guy live up to whatever my expectation for him might be, or did we maybe make an error? Did we evaluate him and bet on the high side and come to find out he doesn't have the makeup, or he's not the right piece in our organization at this time? So it's tough. I think it's one of those things where every franchise in this league has to decide, are you going to rock with your guy the way Toronto did with Pascal Siakam and watch him develop and feed him slowly and give him enough of an opportunity that keeps him grinding and working the way he did? Or do you bet on some guys and then you find out very quickly that they're not going to be worth the investment, not the money, but the investment you've made in keeping them on your roster? Because I think every guy's worth whatever he gets from a financial perspective, but the investment that you make in a guy, it's not just about money. It's about what, you invested in a guy being a part of your franchise, being a building block of your franchise when you talk about a multi-year extension off of a rookie deal.
Yeah, it's going to be a difficult decision come this summer if they want to sign them to that extension prior to the next season. I see your point. Like, he really hasn't hit in this league. There's small samples here and there from Malik Monk where you're excited about him. We do have several more questions before we get out of here, Sekou. I want to shift the conversation to the national stage, NBA level down in Orlando. We've all watched these scrimmages and seen the different environment down there. The plain Jane court, the LED boards on the side with all the animations and the chants. But clearly this is a neutral site, and removing home court advantage, do you believe that's going to have any kind of effect on the playoffs? And I feel like some players even feed off the energy of playing on the road. Is there anything that you can point to that would affect the outcome of these games, or do you think talent's just going to win out here on this neutral bubble side?
Man, I listen, I think it has to have some impact because we've never seen a playoffs conducted this way. So we're going to find out if these teams that are really good on their home court in the playoffs traditionally, based on this season or based on recent seasons, like how much does that impact your ability to win in these situations? We just kind of assumed, I think we've always assumed that home court was so important because of this idea. Oh, you got to get a game, you got to get home court so you can have a game 7, on your floor. And it's like, how many of these series go to game 7s? And how many champions end up having to win games, crucial season-defining games in the playoffs on the road? Happens all the time. So I think this is less about talent shining through and more about discipline shining through. We're going to find out which group of these, 16 playoff teams, which group is the most disciplined, because that's going to be what separates you, I think, in this bubble. And I'm going down in a few weeks. I'm going down in the next month until it's over, until the final's over. And I'm only going to be there for half the time, basically. And I'm dreading how do you stay focused and locked in in that bubble environment. Can you imagine if you're one of these teams that you showed up in mid-July and you're trying to play all the way till October? That's going to take – you can have all the talent in the world. You're going to need some luck.
Yeah.
You're going to need some serious stamina, and you're going to have some collective discipline that you've never exhibited before, because you don't have the luxury of going back home and the home environment and, knowing the rims that you're playing. I mean, that is gone. That part of this playoff dynamic is gone. And I think it's fantastic that it's gone for everybody. because we're gonna get a playoffs that's something we're all used to. All the elements of their environment are going to come into play for everybody. It's going to be the same. Everybody's dealing with the same thing. They're all sleeping in a room that's not their room. It's everything's a road game right now for everybody, and I think that's cool.
Right. I was listening to your podcast with Jim Jackson the other day, and he was talking about how there's going to be an asterisk on this season, but not because it's going to be invalidated, but because these teams are going to have to work harder, stay disciplined, and focus, just like you just said.
Yeah, I mean, everybody keeps talking about that. Well, it's not a real championship. I don't remember saying that in any shortened season that's going on since I've been around the league. I mean, man, I don't know if people understand that either, how difficult it is to play to the last day of the season. And these teams that do it year after year, like Cleveland to do it, and Miami to do it, LeBron to do it 8 straight years. I don't know if people realize how preposterous that is.
Yeah.
Like how ridiculous a thing that is to be on the court the last game of the season every year for so to do that now in this environment with so much uncertainty, can you imagine how your mind is racing if you're down there worried about getting this championship and we don't know what the state of the country will be in September and October. We have no idea. I mean, there's a lot on it. I think J. Jack was right, and I anybody else who says it, there's an asterisk for sure on this season, and it's a medal of honor for whoever snatches that Larry O'Brien trophy. I don't care what you say.
Agreed. There's so many new variables and hurdles to clear this year. I've been asked by a couple people, like, what team do you think is best positioned to be down in the bubble? And for me, it's just like, whoever gets the most injury luck seems like that's probably the team that's going to be the teams with the most talented and those that can avoid serious injuries. But sticking with the bubble concept, there's an article that was posted last night or Tuesday night by Tim Bontemps over on ESPN.com. And I think it's an idea that's probably been floating around in everyone's head the last couple of weeks. If you've been keeping up with the NBA, you're seeing the success of the bubble leagues like the NBA, WNBA, NWSL, MLS, maybe now the NHL, compared to some of the struggles that are now happening with Major League Baseball. And the NBAPA executive director, Michelle Roberts, who's down in the bubble right now, she was quoted as saying, quote, "If tomorrow looks like today, I don't know if we can do it any differently," end quote, about the sort of like the need to return to the bubble for next season. And it's something that has to be going around in your mind, like given the state of COVID, of C-19 in America, like it's not slowing down right now. Right. Do you have any thoughts on the feasibility for a bubble next season? Like we know the focus for the league, Woj came out and tweeted about this today. Like there's the focus is to have fans in the stands next season, which we'll see. But do you think, could you see perhaps a shortened season or things being divided up into regional pods and teams going in and out of the bubble? Can you sort of visualize that at all for next season? Do you think it's a realistic possibility?
I don't know if I think it's a realistic possibility as much as I think it would be a necessity. If things got completely out of control on the health and safety front. I didn't pay enough attention in my science classes in high school to know exactly where, I'm catching up on all of the medical information. Like, I read a really interesting story about the Spanish flu of 1918. And the parallels for what went on then with what we're dealing with now are striking when you read this and kind of refer back to it and think about the dealing, what we're dealing with now here, in the summer of 2020. So much of next season in the NBA and anywhere in any other league is dependent on how we handle the pandemic, how we we as a country, the government, leaders around, in all states, everywhere. It's whether or not you can fight back the aggressiveness of this pandemic that nobody had. Think about it. Nobody had the right answers for it for the first 60 days we heard about it. It was nobody knew. So when I first heard of the concept though of the everybody thought we might have two sites, one East, one West to resume this season or playoffs or whatever we're gonna have. That made the most sense to me. And it's something you could do if forced, you could do it just from a playing standpoint. But from a financial standpoint, I absolutely do not think you could do this again. You're asking the owners to take too big a bath, to not have arena revenue, concession. Think of all the money that's not there if you were to have to go the end of one season in the playoffs and then another whole season or the start of another whole season without your normal function. I just don't know financially how you could make that work.
Yeah, it's going to be a conversation that continues for quite a while now. And then you consider the China story that came out from ESPN a little bit ago and the salary cap implications that could have. And the NBA's got some things to figure out right now from a financial perspective. And they're not alone in that pond, but it is it's probably going to get uglier before it gets better. So let's stay on the financial conversation real quick here, Sekou, but talk about the Hornets specifically. They have a lot of different directions they can go in here this offseason. And I think it's certainly, from my perspective, one of the more exciting things about this team in a while since, what we were going to do with Kemba Walker. But they could take on long-term money. They're going to have anywhere from probably $17 to $25 million in space this summer. So they could take on long-term money and bad deals in a trade. They got 2 expiring contracts, Cody Zeller and
Batum?
Sorry, I just had a
Nick Batum.
Nick Batum. I just had a brain fart there. I'm sorry. They could spend that money on one player. I think Christian Wood's a popular name that we've seen. Montrezl Harrell, another one. And they need help in the center to be sure. Or they could use that on like 2 mid-level guys. So what do you see, in your opinion, as maybe the best route for the Hornets to take right now with this cap space they have this summer and then even more going forward?
Yeah, look, cap space is fantastic. It's it's wonderful to have until you realize you got to convince somebody to come take it, and that somebody might not always turn out to be, the option number one that you had, on your list. Guy like Montrezl Harrell, and I don't like prognosticating about stuff like this, just for the sake of it, but you guys know his roots, and to me in this day and age, you're always looking for what kind of connection you might have, how what would tug at a guy in terms of coming to play for a specific franchise.
The Hornets have a history of that as well. Just to stick that in there real quick.
Yeah, so you have to factor all that in. I'm much more interested to see what goes their way in the draft than I am with what they do with their money and free agency, because I think you need to be wise and a little more frugal with your cash when you have big, kind of like what Atlanta is doing now. They haven't really taken that deep dive into free agency yet, and they've got young players that they've, a young superstar potentially in Trae Young. To me, you maybe you're a little more